Hello you guys, it has been a little while. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and if you are new here, welcome. My name is Beth and I share all about motherhood and lifestyle here on my YouTube channel, and today I'm very excited because I get to share with you guys the birth story of our second baby girl and our third baby. This is little Rosalie Jane. She goes by Rosie in our house and we have just been loving her. The transition into having 3 under 3 has certainly been very full, but it's gone a lot better than I had anticipated. We are both recovering very well. I've been so enjoying the little newborn bubble and just taking it slow for the last week and a half that she's been here with us, but I thought it would be a good time to sit down and to share her birth story from my perspective, especially before all of the little pieces and details of it get blurry and foggier in my mind. It was such a good and just empowering birth story, and I personally love hearing other people's birth stories, so I thought I would share mine with you guys today. So for context, I was working with a team of midwives throughout this pregnancy, but essentially they kind of changed the way that they operated so that there would be 2 separate teams, and then you would have all of your appointments and meetings with that team, and then one of the 3 people on that team would be the one that would be present at your actual birth. And it was funny because 2 of the midwives I saw very frequently, one of them being the one that was there and present for my birth with Jude, and then one of them I actually only ever met with once. But it was funny because after I met her, I felt like we just jived in terms of our view on birth, but obviously didn't know that for sure because it was the first time that we had ever met. But I remember in that one appointment with her, she had told me that basically as I got towards the end of my pregnancy that I might not really be able to bank on the 5-1-1 rule. It's this idea that you would want to call your care provider when your contractions are about 5 minutes apart, lasting for about 1 minute for at least an hour. And she had kind of said when you get to your 3rd baby, it doesn't always go that textbook, and so what you want to be watching for specifically is increasing intensity in your contractions. So that was just something that I had bookmarked and had in the back of my head, especially towards the back half of my pregnancy. Basically, when I was around 39 weeks, I had a prodromal labor experience where I woke up one morning and around 10 or 11 a.m. I started having these consistent contractions that were not Braxton Hicks, but they weren't increasing in intensity. And I just remember the midwife saying we're looking for intensity. And so I had those contractions through the course of a day and basically just decided you know what, I'm not going to call the midwife because they're not getting harder to work through, and they ended up fizzling out, so it was false labor. But I do remember around 40 weeks just kind of deciding you know what, I think I do want to do a cervical check. Cervical checks are not something that I did the last time. I just felt the cervical checks gave me anxiety. I was nervous that they were just going to be painful. I was nervous that I would be not as progressed as I wanted to be and just get discouraged and stall labor because of that discouragement. So I was very up in my head about cervical check. This time around, I didn't really have that same anxiety. I felt a lot more confident before going into birth that I could do this. And so I actually thought it would be helpful to have some sort of frame of reference of kind of where I was at, especially because at this point, what we had known about her position was that she was still kind of sunny side up or posterior. So basically her head was presenting forward instead of turning backward towards my spine. And I just didn't know if that would impact dilation or kind of what all of that would look like. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna get a cervical check. I just feel it would be helpful personally for me to know. So I had my 40-week appointment, and that was the one where I found out that I was already at 4 centimeters and 70% effaced. But at this point, I had not experienced any real signs of labor beginning. The only thing that I had experienced outside of very occasional moderate Braxton Hicks was that one day of the prodromal labor. So obviously my body had been getting ready in some sense. I honestly feel because of her position being posterior, it kind of led to more of that false labor happening. But at this point, my body was getting ready. And the thing with dilation is that it doesn't actually mean that much until you're truly in active labor. So you can sit at a certain level of dilation for a very long time before things actually kick into gear and it's go time. And that was the case for me because at 40 weeks pregnant and 4 centimeters, 70% effaced, I still did not give birth for another entire week. Being that dilated, I had lost bits of my mucus plug over the course of like the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to that point. So I knew that things were progressing, but the thing with a mucus plug is that if you didn't know, it can actually regenerate. And so for some people, you just like continue to lose mucus plug for a very extended period of time, and it doesn't actually mean that labor is like days away. For me, it was still weeks. So over the course of being 40 weeks pregnant up until 41 weeks pregnant, I was basically just trying to relax, trying not to think about it too much, because due dates are obviously just estimates and like your baby is gonna come when they're ready to come. But for anyone that has gone late before, you know how hard it can be, not even just for yourself mentally, but because of the elements of like the outside pressure that can come with that as well. Text messages and the DMs and everything, like there were multiple times that I just needed to turn my phone off, literally delete Instagram from my phone and just try and like get away from all that noise, because it's so hard and you're so excited to meet your baby. To have those outside pressures of people asking like, at what point are you gonna like decide to get induced and all of these things. And so I just remember trying to block all of that stuff out mentally and just try and focus on rest and trying to get her into as like optimal of a position as possible before the real thing started. So I did actually that week sleep a ton, and I think that my body just knew that I needed that to get ready. In the evenings, I would spend a lot of time on the birth ball, doing things like the mile circuit, going for long family walks, and basically, again, just trying to do whatever I could do to get myself in the best possible position for when she was actually going to come. Fast forward to April 26th. So on this day, I was 40 weeks and 6 days pregnant, and this was a Friday. My husband was off work at this point, and I remember waking up that day for some reason and just feeling very discouraged. I think because I had gone to 40 weeks and 5 days in my last pregnancy, and so waking up at 40 weeks and 6 was like the longest that I had gone, and for some reason in my head that was just like a weird kind of mental hurdle that I needed to get around. Essentially, we had Jared's mom staying with us for I think 2 or 3 weeks before this point, and there was only one more week that she was even actually able to stay and help us with the kids while I was literally giving birth and into that first week with a newborn. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like my timeline for support is running out. I have no clear signs that active labor is going to start anytime soon, and I was just feeling so down. And Jared and I actually started having conversations about me considering taking the Midwife's brew. It's kind of this like natural concoction that you can try taking to induce labor, and there are lots of mixed opinions on that, so don't rush and go take that. If you are overdue, you definitely need to talk to your care provider about it first. But we had considered me doing that day because I was getting impatient and I wanted this baby to come. I wanted it to happen on the weekend while we were all gonna be home and while support was there. And that kind of became the game plan, is that later that afternoon I would start that and try and time that around the kids' bedtimes, because I was kind of anxious that they were going to be present at the time that I delivered. And I know for some people they're like really into that and they want to be able to experience that with the whole family, but with a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old, I feel like it's a little bit different. I just knew that it would be kind of stressful for me to have them present for that, and it's just not something that I personally wanted to navigate. And so that was another just element in my mind of like feeling this control of like I need to manufacture the timeline that this is gonna happen. And funnily enough, that afternoon I got a call from the midwife that was on call, and it ended up being the one that I was letting you guys know about at the beginning of this, that I had met with once, but I knew that we were like on the same page in terms of labor and birth and all of these things. So she called me and told me that she wanted me to go that afternoon in for an ultrasound to check on fluid level. And we were both kind of on the same page that if everything looked good, that we would go up until 42 weeks before having any conversations around any other type of induction. And she was saying, it's totally up to you, but I think it would be the right thing to do. And obviously it was my top priority as well to make sure that she was safe before we decided to either keep waiting it out, or especially if I was going to try doing something like the Midwife's brew, I wanted to know that she was healthy first. So I went in for the ultrasound and everything looked healthy. The fluid levels were amazing. Baby girl was totally good in there, which I knew she would be. I had confidence in that, but it was good to just have that be kind of like confirmed before going into the rest of the day. So I got home, we were all kind of together just hanging out as a family, and I don't know, there was just something in my spirit that felt very off about taking the midwife's brew. And it's not something that I've ever felt before, but I just felt like this personal conviction on it of like, I right now am not trusting God's timing for this baby. And what I don't want you guys to think is that induction, whether natural or medical, is wrong, because there are totally reasons to induce. And I think that there are good reasons to do that if your care providers are on the same page with you with that. But I think for me in that moment, it was just this weird feeling of being off about taking things into my own hands. It just felt like I was being a little bit impulsive and trying to be controlling, if that makes sense. And so I talked to Jared about it and he's like, let's pray. And if we both feel off about it, we're not gonna do it. So we prayed together and we both felt off about it. We both just felt like God knows the date that this baby girl is supposed to come. It is marked on his calendar and we can trust in that, we can rest in that. We've already made it this far waiting. Like, what is another few days at this point, as long as I am healthy and she is healthy? So we both just kind of like let it go and ended up going on a big family walk together and just enjoying that time. That night at around 10 p.m., I went to the bathroom and I had the bloody show. That is not something that I have like experienced to the extent that I experienced to this extent. I feel like I had seen like some red tinged mucus in the past, but this time I was like, that is the bloody show. And it's the thing that I've heard so many people talk about. And I actually felt like it was just an answered prayer of like, your baby is coming, I've got this. Like, all you need to do is just relax and surrender to the process. So I told Jared about it. And then the funny thing afterwards is like, I got this like huge rush of adrenaline of like, I'm gonna have this baby soon. And it was a very weird thing, but I started getting like full body shakes. I don't know if it was like from the adrenaline. I don't know if it was like anxiety thinking about what was about to come. I just remember feeling like so cold and him needing to like layer me with blankets as I went to bed that night. And then basically that night from like 10 p.m. when the bloody show happened up until 4 a.m., I was having a lot of contractions. And again, the contractions were very consistent. They were lasting for about a minute long, but they weren't increasing in intensity. But because I had had that bloody show, I remember waking Jared up around 4 and just saying like, I think this baby is coming today. Should we get anything set up right now? Like, what do you think that we should do? I was just so tired at this point. And he's like, if she's coming today, like what you need to do is get some sleep because you have been up all night. And he is a very good birth partner. I feel like he just pays very close attention and is able to like talk me down from my ledges a lot of the time. So he was right. I needed to sleep and I ended up falling asleep around 5 a.m. and basically sleeping through until around 8 a.m. on the 27th. The day of April 27th was honestly the weirdest day ever. I felt like I was just in this very strange limbo, especially even just like with God, because I felt like I knew she was coming that day, but there were no signs of anything progressing or anything picking up other than like having the bloody show the night before and those contractions overnight that had kind of petered off. My mother-in-law was still there, so she had the kids for most of the day, and I spent a lot of the day just in our bedroom trying to relax, trying to nap, but things were just like not picking up. And I was like, God, what is going on with this? Like, this is just such a strange intro to labor. Do I still have another week before this baby is gonna come, or like, is she actually coming today? I have the timestamps of like when everything was kind of happening and like breaking down, and it was around 3 p.m. that day, so quite late in the afternoon, that I texted my mom and my sister and I was like, I'm having like some tightening, but like nothing is intensifying, nothing is picking up, and I just like don't know kind of where things are at right now. Our oldest was actually up in the bed with me because she wasn't feeling great that day and just kind of wanted to be close by. So I was like, you know what? she's napping. I'm gonna try and just like lay down beside her and grab a quick nap because it was such a long night and I just need to rest. So I lay down beside her and managed to fall asleep for about 45 minutes and then woke up with a very intense contraction. So I just kept my eyes closed, just kept trying to rest. And then sure enough, a few minutes later, another one of those very intense contractions happened again. So at this point I was like, okay, I feel like things might be turning a corner a little bit now. That was around like 4:30, and shortly after 6 p.m. I decided that I wanted to call the midwife to let her know that the contractions were picking up in intensity even though they weren't consistent yet. At this point I'm like having a full phone conversation with her, like sounding very relaxed. So I knew that it wasn't active labor yet, but I just kind of wanted to get her opinion. And she's like, you know what, I'm gonna pop over. Why don't we just like check and I'll monitor some of your contractions and just get a sense of like what's going on. So I was like, that sounds great, come on over. So she came over and arrived a little bit before the kids' bedtime. I feel like it was around like 6:40 or something like that. She had all of her gear and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know if we're quite there yet. So she came into the room with me and did a check and I was at 5 centimeters. So I was like, okay, we've made slight progress, but I honestly didn't expect to be further than that because I was still very relaxed and still was like totally fine in terms of coping through the contractions. But basically after she checked me, she gave me a couple of options. She's like, I can either stay and get everything set up and we can be ready to go, or if that feels like too much for you, I can head out and you can call me back in a little bit if things continue to pick up. And basically I just like paused to think about it for a second because the way that my head was going, I was like, if you stay, I gotta have a baby. Like, I'm not gonna have you get everything set up and then not have a baby. And I don't know, I must have been sitting there like thinking for a while in silence because eventually she was like, you know what, I'm gonna stay. In the moment, I was just like honestly happy that she made the decision for me because I feel like I wasn't sure what I even really wanted her to do. I was just nervous that things were going to fizzle out again, but she seemed to be confident in the fact that staying was the right thing. So I think if anything, it gave me another level of confidence of like, you know what, this baby is coming. So she started getting set up and I said to Jared, because we were now kind of in the throes of like the bedtime hour with the kids, which with a 2 and a 1-year-old can be a little bit wild sometimes, especially if you're having contractions. So I said to my husband, I was like, I think I'm gonna stay in the back room with the midwife like while she's getting set up and just try and like focus in there because I'm nervous of this contraction stalling out. The midwife was saying when I was back there, she was like, I think that you should go and like just be with your kids for a little bit. She basically just reminded me that this could be the last bedtime that I have with the kids where it's just the 2 of them and me and Jared. And she was like, it would be really good to just go and get some good snuggles with them. It'll get the oxytocin flowing. So I left the room, I came out here with the kids and we did bedtime stories and just kind of snuggled together on the couch for a little bit. And it was good because I felt like it really did just allow me to relax a little bit more, to just know like the kids are going down, the kids are going to be taken care of. And while I was out on the couch with them, I started having more of those like strong contractions that I could feel really helping to move things along. So Jared finished bedtime with the kids and I remember I went and I sat down on the toilet for a little while in our bedroom. And if you've never heard this before, the toilet is often referred to as the dilation station because you just naturally know to relax when you're sitting there, and that's definitely what happened. So Jared finishes bedtime and he comes in as I'm sitting there on the toilet and I have a contraction while I'm sitting there and I said to him, that was a transition contraction. And he's like, babe, they literally just checked you. You were just 5 centimeters. I don't think that you're in transition right now. And you probably wouldn't be like laughing and talking to me about being in transition. But I said to him, I was like, no, I really do think that was a transition contraction, like kind of just like jokingly. And so I had the midwife check me again. And sure enough, I was 7 centimeters dilated. So the bedtime snuggles with the kids definitely helped to move things along. So somehow in that process of like going and snuggling the kids, my body just really kicked into gear and I was finally in active labor. So by 7:45, it was time to get the birth tub set up. I knew that I didn't really want to labor in the birth tub. I wanted to be able to still have like the freedom of movement, but I really like to push in the birth tub and it takes a good chunk of time to get that thing like fully blown up and all of the water into it at the right temperature. So he started getting that set up knowing that basically it was going to be another 30 to 40 minutes before I would even be able to get into that if I needed it. And at this point, everything was moving just very quickly. Because she was sunny side up, there was just so much back labor, and I felt like I needed to be very, very focused to cope through all of that. The cool thing this time is that instinctively, my body just kind of knew the positions that I needed to be in to help her move down the way that she needed to move down in my pelvis. I just remained in a deep squat for so long, and I actually used these little like yoga blocks to try and like create some asymmetry in my pelvis, because it was just what was feeling good at the time. I was holding onto the bed in a deep squat with one foot elevated, or I would have one foot up on the bed and kind of be lunging forward, just like trying to create enough space for her to move down. And it was just such a cool experience, because in that process of like paying attention to what my body was feeling, I could feel so much of like what she was doing inside of me, if that makes sense. And the funniest thing to me about my labor is that it was like dead silent for so much of it, other than the sound of me just like vocalizing and making those like low kind of deep sounds to cope through the contractions. Because after we finished getting the kids to bed and like the midwives were all set up, the second one had arrived, basically they said to me like, we are gonna sit back, like you and your husband go in there together, get whatever you want to have set up, and just kind of like spend some time together. And I thought that that was amazing and just such a great recommendation, because again, they had already shown up and got everything set up. So they actually came out here and were in the living room and the kitchen, just like listening and kind of waiting for when they needed to come back in. But for the most part, it was just Jared and I in the room for a lot of those like early transition contractions. And I just like felt like I needed to focus like very intently on what was happening. I actually tried to download the Christian hypnobirthing app because I realized I hadn't done that yet. And then it like wanted me to create an account and I couldn't remember my login, and I'm like trying to go through the forget password thing. And I'm like, I'm in transition right now. I can't worry about this. So eventually I just decided like to can it, and I was like, you know what, it's just gonna be silent and I'm just gonna like cope through these contractions. And it was so funny because the midwives could hear that they were getting more intense, so they came back into the room when they felt like it was the right time to do that. They were very hands off and just kind of allowing me to work through everything, and it was just kind of a dead silent room with me in labor with my husband and the midwives there. And I was also so desperate at this point for counter pressure. I remember needing it a lot in my last home birth, but this time around, like with her being sunny side up, it was on a whole another level of like desperation. I was still getting pretty good breaks in between the contractions where I was able to talk and like be present with the people in the room, but when they kicked in, Jared needed to like immediately run behind me to be doing that counter pressure. I remember like explaining to the midwives that I could feel the feeling of her kind of like changing position while I was having the contractions and kind of dropping down into my pelvis. And the one midwife came over to kind of monitor where her heart rate was at, and everything was good, but she was like, your baby is in a completely different position than she was a couple minutes ago. So she had done some sort of significant turn internally, and I could actually feel that happening. The two of us were quite literally like working together to bring her into the world, which was such a cool feeling. It sounds weird, but I feel like I honestly loved that like transition portion of labor this time, because I felt so in tune with my body, so just like empowered. And it was nice after having so many like false contractions leading up to it to know that I was actually going to get to meet her soon. Around, I think it was like 10-ish p.m. I knew that she was coming out soon because I could feel her literally like descending, and I wasn't like pushy yet, but I knew that I was pretty close to it. And so I was like, this could go very quick at this point. And I feel like I'm at a point now with where she's at like locationally that I can get into the tub and kind of cope through the remaining contractions in there. At this point, my water had not broken yet, so I decided to get into the tub, and it felt amazing to be in there. I just kind of remained in that deep squat position. I had my comb in one hand and was just kind of squeezing it because that helps kind of like re-channel the pain receptors and refocus on something else and a different feeling. Eventually, my legs were getting really tired, and I was like, I feel like I just need to like sit in a different way. So the position that I delivered in the birth tub in last time time was kind of like seated backwards, like legs open on the little pillow that's in the birth tub, and it's kind of like a forward facing squat but seated, if that makes sense. And I remember like wishing that I would have delivered more like all fours or in a squat last time, but this time when I got into that position, it just kind of felt good. Like it felt like muscle memory. I don't know if it's because I delivered last time in that position, but I felt like I could see a little bit more, which was also just like more motivating for me at this stage. So once I got into that position, I did do a couple of pushes through those contractions. And I remember asking the midwives if I was crowning yet, because I reached down and I couldn't feel anything. And I was like, are you seeing anything? And they said that they could see her head, that they could see hair, but the sac was still intact. So my water had not yet broken, and it was basically acting like a cushion between baby girl's head and her actually coming out into the world. And so they basically gave me a couple of options in that moment. They were like, it's completely up to you. You can keep pushing, and eventually what will happen is that your water will likely break and your baby girl will come out. Another scenario is obviously that your baby could be born in the sac and you deliver all of that at once. Or a third option, if you're feeling like you just want to meet your baby right now, is we can just give that sac a little bit of a poke because her head is right there. And what's likely going to happen, just so that you know, is that her whole body is just going to come out. But at this point, I was like, I'm going to be in the last like 2 to 3 minutes of this labor experience if they give that a poke. I felt very good about telling them to just poke it, because at this point I didn't see the value in like trying to keep pushing for Lord knows how long just to have my water break on its own. It honestly felt like just like a silly preference thing at that point, being so close to the end. I was like, just poke it, let's be done here and let's meet this girl. So they poked it, and I'm not kidding you guys, it was not 2 to 3 minutes, it was like seconds. Her whole body on the next contraction came out, and around like her shoulder / chest area, she got slightly stuck, but the midwives were basically able to just kind of maneuver and get the rest of her out in the way that she needed to come out. And it was the most relieving and like shocking feeling ever. That is now 2 times that I have not had the experience at all of like crowning or ring of fire. Basically my baby's just like entire bodies come out at once, and I don't know how to explain it other than the feeling of literally just a human dropping out of you. It is like the most bizarre feeling in the world, but there's like so much relief with it. And it's funny because both times that has happened to me now, I let out this like weird squeal scream because it's just like a foreign feeling and I don't know how else to react to it. But she let out the loudest cry right away, which is one of the things that I had actually written down in like my little prayer journal of how I was like really hoping and praying that my birth experience would go. I got to bring her right up to my chest and we did delayed cord clamping, and I just remember her coming out and Jared and I both just being so excited to finally see her. We have like talked and envisioned so much what she was gonna look like because both of our kids look so different from each other, and I feel like she was just such a fun combination of the two of them. I feel like this time around, it's not that I didn't have like that crazy oxytocin high, I just feel like I was a lot more present than I was the last time. After my first home birth, I was so just like shocked by what had happened and by the fact that I did it, and this time I kind of was like, yeah, I did it. Like I knew that I was gonna do it, I knew that I was gonna be able to get her here, and I was just like so present and aware, and it was just like a different experience and a different feeling. I was able to be like, okay, like I'm ready to come out of the tub, I'm ready to go lay on the bed with her. And I think partly because it did go so fast and I was so ready for her to come at the point that she came, that all of it I just have very clear memories of, and none of that was like blurry at this point. So I got out of the tub, which took a lot of help because my tailbone or like my back just felt so sore from all of the like back labor. But Jared had her and they were doing skin to skin, and the midwives helped me get up into the bed before they brought her back to me. And I did have to get one little stitch. I had like a 1st degree superficial tear again, because of the way that her body came out all at once, super fast. There was no like coached or timed pushing or anything like that. It was just full on fetal ejection reflex. So I did get a little bit of a stitch, which was totally fine and has been healing very well. Before that, I delivered the placenta kind of on the bed as well. Honestly, after you've just delivered a baby, delivering the placenta feels like a walk in the park. It's like this weird relief that you just have all of a sudden, and it feels so right to have your baby up on your chest and snuggled with you and everything else out. At this point, Jared's mom and sister-in-law came into the room just to see us and to see her, and I got to breastfeed her for the first time, which went really well. She latched on basically right away, which was awesome. We did all of the checks on her, and she ended up being my smallest baby yet, which everyone was kind of surprised by. She was 7 pounds and 12 ounces, which was right on the nose what I guessed that she would be. We kind of all did a guess after she came out because she looked significantly smaller than my last two, being 9'7" and 8'12". And everyone was like, what do you think she is? And I was like, she's 7'12". And sure enough, right on the nose, she was 7 pounds, 12 ounces. And the midwives were gone shortly after midnight. So it was just Jared and her and I in our bedroom, just cozy and safe at home, which is one of my favorite parts about home birth, if not the best part. After your baby's here, you just get to be so cozy and snuggled up at home. We were all kind of hoping after such a whirlwind labor, because I wasn't really in active labor until like 7:40 p.m. and she was out by 10:26. And we were all kind of thinking that she would be so exhausted from the experience, but no, she was up all night cluster feeding. But she is just such a little darling, and it was such a great birth experience overall. There were so many pieces of it that again just like went differently than I had imagined, from the midwife showing up and getting set up before I was in active labor, to the timing of it being so much later than I had anticipated, to her positioning being weird and my early labor being just like so confusing. There really is nothing like the level of surrender that birth requires. Your birth plan, surrender to any desire for control that you may have, and just a need for a full reliance and trust in God, because at the end of the day, He is the only one that knows all of the details, from the birth date to the location of where things are going to happen to how everything is going to pan out. And I will never forget that feeling on the 26th after praying with Jared about wanting to take matters into our own hands and just feeling the Holy Spirit be like, do you trust me with this? Okay, I'm gonna let this go. I'm gonna trust this in your hands, God, because ultimately you knit this baby together in my womb, and ultimately you care about all of these things so much more deeply than I do. So I just wanted to remind anyone that is still kind of maybe pregnant and waiting for their birth, or maybe things didn't go the way that you were expecting with your birth, that God is still in control, that He's still good, that He's still worthy of praise. These children are still a gift from Him regardless of how they came into the world, and that He's worth trusting in all of it. And He's shown us that time and time again. So that is sweet little Rosie Jane's birth story. I have no idea how long it took me to tell that. I'm kind of nervous to go back and edit all of this, but I didn't want to leave any of the details out because I feel like it's just fun to share all of it. I know that I'm gonna get so many questions and comments about it, so I'm gonna answer it just now. I have good news and bad news about the birth vlog. We actually have a lot more of this experience filmed, just because, again, I was able to be a lot more present and just kind of like aware this time around. But the bad news is that the literal moment that she was delivered is not on camera. And when I discovered that, I was very, very sad about it at first, not even from the perspective of like being able to share it with you guys, but from the perspective of like, I feel like I can't go back and watch that moment again, which gonna try not to cry about it, but that was like an important thing for me to be able to do, basically because of the fact that I had so much intense back labor with her position. I was desperate for Jared to be present for all of the moments of counter pressure. And with my camera, basically my memory cards cap out at like 25 minutes. And so I have footage in the tub of me in the beginning stages of like pushing and just like the final process of laboring in there, and then the memory card fills up and I don't have any footage again until shortly after she was out and we like allowed people to come into the room. And so basically at this point I'm wondering like what I should do with the birth vlog, if I should even still like edit it together and share it, because I feel like so many people watch birth vlogs to be able to like see that climactic moment of like the baby being delivered and that being like such a special moment of the video. And I just unfortunately don't have footage of that this time around. My priority in that moment was like having my husband with me and supporting me through the contractions. And so we didn't know the camera had stopped recording, but I wasn't about to go and like send him to check if it was recording, if that makes sense. So I hope that you guys understand. Basically where I'm at mentally with it now is like, if enough people still want to see the remainder of the vlog with like how all of the contractions went and how I coped through them, I can still edit that together if enough people want to see it. It's just not going to include that moment of her like actually coming out into the world. So let me know what you guys think, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you are pregnant, let me know what your due date is in the comments. I want to be praying for so many of you guys because I just know how much that meant to me, especially in that process of like watching all of the birth stories myself when I was still pregnant. So definitely do that. But until my next video, I love you guys. I'm praying for you guys. Thank you so much for praying for us, and I will see you soon.